Good afternoon. Our keynote speaker today is Dr. Patricia Duff, known as Patsy. There's so much I can say about Patsy's, but so I don't want to lose track of time, so I'm going to stick to my notes. Patsy is professor and distinguished university scholar and associate dean of research in the Faculty of Education at the University of British Columbia. She's also a past president of the American Association for Applied Linguistics. She's the author of many books, many journal articles, and in many book chapters, and in many of which receive thousands of downloads and views every year. So if you're wondering why her work is so popular, and that is because through her work, Patsy explains to us the very complicated, very messy process of language learning, especially in bilingual and multilingual contexts. So she delineates for us the variables at the macro, the meso, and the micro levels that play a role in language and cultural development. And not only that, she also teaches us how to do research, particularly how to use qualitative research methods. And her distinguished achievements earned her prestigious recognitions, such as the American Association for Applied Linguistics Distinguished Scholarship and Service Award, which is the highest honor bestowed upon applied linguists. And I would like also to add a personal note. So for more than 30 years, Patsy has not only been a remarkable professional role model for me, but also a very cherished personal friend. Our connection dates back to our shared experience in the doctoral program UCLA, and she embodies the kinds of things, the qualities that I have always aspired to cultivate both as a student and as a scholar. As you would hear, Patsy is extremely perceptive and open-minded and has a profound understanding of the history of the field as well as a visionary projection of its future. So she and I have a lot of overlapping research interests, and in addition, she and I also share some deep friendships, including our connection to the late Tim McNamara, who delivered our inaugural MIC Distinguished Lecture exactly 10 years ago. So Patsy has this exceptional capacity of advancing the entire field as she progresses in her own work, and she always supports, encourages, and creates connections and opportunities for colleagues. And that is why she graciously agreed to make a special trip all the way from Vancouver to here to help us celebrate the center's anniversary, despite having plans to come back to New York City in just a matter of a couple of weeks. It's a plan that she had made way before we extended the invitation for her to come. So this is just one example of her unwavering commitment to the scholarly community. So please join me in welcoming an academic and intellectual leader, my esteemed colleague and dear friend, Dr. Patsy Duff.
Get my slides up. Well, thank you for that very generous introduction, and thank you all for being here together with me and the others to celebrate this really, really important milestone in the history of the Center for Multilingual and Intercultural Communication. It really is a celebration of Agnes's fortitude, her own vision, her perseverance, and her ability to bring people in together. As she said, you can't do these things alone. So warm congratulations to Agnes, the colleagues, the advisory committee, the students, the interns, and so many others, including from the wider community. So, and I'm just really delighted to be able to say a few things. I was given 30 minutes, so when she said the future of the the field and the world and so on. There's only so much I can say in the time I'm allotted, and also I'll explain why it's very hard to know where things are going in our field. Now, let me... Okay, so this is the outline. I'll talk about advances that MIC has made and our field has made over the last 10 years, some issues and some future directions. In preparation for today, I did some homework. I think I should receive 3 credits at least for looking at the 37 videos and interviews and the workshops that are part of this amazing tapestry of MIC knowledge exchange, collaboration, and action. These are some of the distinguished speakers that have been part of the 10 years and who have spoken so eloquently about local and global concerns here at Stony Brook University, in the wider community, and well beyond. The interdisciplinarity, that amazing documentary and presentation just now using the digital arts in relation to migration, mobility, identity, just fantastic. And looking at the nexus of theory, research, policy, and practice, which is so important, because theory is great, but if you can't inform practice, then it's not going to be very helpful for people who are feeling marginalized, who are feeling left out, disenfranchised, and so on. And these and so many others who are part of MIC have also tackled some timely real-world issues on campus and beyond, and have helped support the student projects over time. I think one just recently was given an award, and then there'll be presentations in the next few weeks that we heard about. So congratulations to all who have been involved for this tremendous collaborative effort. Oops. I've been using Mac for too long now. I'm a little PC inhibited. So I'm just going to say a little bit about contemporary multilingualism. We heard some of the stories and also saw some of the visual representations of multilingualism in contemporary lives of youth and adults, families, intergenerational mobility, and so on, which is often very unknown to monolinguals who have stayed in the same place their whole lives and who don't have an appreciation for the richness of these experiences. And so for many multilinguals, as we have seen in some of the depictions, this is a life-wide process of negotiating multiple languages. And they may be learned like first language, second language, third language, and then back to the first language in the case of heritage learners. And then learning, expanding one's styles and genres and registers as needed across different disciplines or business settings or other settings. So they can be learned concurrently or sequentially in different orders, and then involving many kinds of symbol systems. We had a wonderful demonstration of that. So very multimodal, sometimes using invented hybrid or syncretic forms, very creative. Memes, look how memes are used, just so creative, and multilingual memes incorporated with different kinds of script systems, which themselves are often manipulated for particular effect. These are highly situated, dynamic, nonlinear. Certainly the journeys of many multilinguals are not linear. They're not just accumulating knowledge in one language and then moving on to the other. And they're fluid. And they involve different kinds of community participation, if not membership. You're in this community or that community, you may stay in this community for a long time, you may move across communities, including transnational communities, or networks, or groups, or disciplines. So these are very fluid too. And then there are various socializing agents and tools and brokers. One agent is oneself, seeking out opportunities to use language, to learn other things. But then, of course, there are many others, mentors and peers, and then the tools at our disposal now, which are amazing too. And brokers, thinking of children being cultural and linguistic brokers for their parents in high-stakes settings, in healthcare and other settings too. And in all of these places, people are negotiating multiple norms about what is good language use, or appropriate, or legally necessary use, the ideologies and the cultures and practices that go with those. And then we saw how people's identities may be very multiple and intersectional. Intersectional meaning female, of a particular race, of a particular age, rural, urban, many kinds of ways in which identities are intersectional and then performed over time and space and place and often borders. Here's an example of Kay. Kay is a pseudonym for someone who was in a project that I did with my colleague Duan Li at UBC some years ago. We did a survey of about 600 students and then got a smaller number of students who were learners of Chinese, especially with a heritage background. And then we wanted to compare the different kinds of experiences these heritage learners had had. So Kay's is quite unusual, but not unique in the sense that people often come, as we have heard earlier, with many kinds of linguistic backgrounds when they come to our courses, and then they move beyond our courses to other places. So Kay was a heritage learner from Hong Kong originally, and her father was Danish, mother was Chinese, who knew many different Chinese languages. Kay grew up Cantonese English bilingual in Hong Kong, learned Mandarin at an international school there, and then moved back to Denmark with her family, where she learned Danish and German. Then she came to Canada, where she studied German and Mandarin, became more proficient in Danish than Mandarin, but then ended up in graduate school in Canada doing her thesis research with migrant workers in Shanghai, and therefore needing to use not only Mandarin, but many other ways of communicating with people from other parts of Shanghai, other parts of China in precarious housing situations. So across her trajectory, which sort of ended when the study ended, we don't know where she is now, we can see the multilingual experiences and the many kinds of intercultural communication she was involved in here and there. Now, what would have been her experience had she presented more? So the image I had on the last slide, she looks rather Caucasian because of her mixed ethnicity. But what if she had looked more typically Chinese in a sense? Would her positioning as a Chinese heritage learner have made a difference in her experiences? Or what if she had been of a different ethnicity again and gender? How might her journey might it have been different, and her experiences and the way others read her or him as a foreigner, as someone who was or was not Chinese? These are the kinds of issues that we explore, and my current research is looking at learners of Chinese from African, Middle East, South Asian contexts, sort of Belt and Road countries, how their experiences are very different from the kinds that we have traditionally researched with Anglo-American or Chinese heritage language learners of Chinese. So next I'm going to talk a bit about advances, and then its issues, and then its future directions. So over the last 10 years of the MIC and our field's development, we've seen burgeoning interdisciplinary research on multilingual and intercultural communication. Lots of examples from those speakers that have been here. And also recognition of global South insights, epistemologies, repertoires, experiences, and post-colonial resilience. So this has been quite a big movement, and of course there was always a lot of research on multilingualism in the Global South, but the Global North didn't talk about it much or publish it or recognize some of these things in ways that we are now realizing we need to. And by Global South I also include indigenous perspectives and languages and decolonization, which is such a priority now in our field and in communities more widely. You've had speakers to MIC whose focus is ratio-linguistic justice, so including Nelson Flores, and he works with Jonathan Rosa. So talking a lot about often People say it's about language. We don't understand your language, or your language is not up to par, the Spanish variety is not standard, or whatever the case may be, but often it's a form of racial discrimination. So they've been bringing this racial-linguistic justice to the fore and focusing on language rights too. And then there are all kinds of acronyms. You must be familiar with a number of them. Some combination of these letters, J and E and D and I and A and D. So justice, J, and EDI is very commonly used, equity, diversity, inclusion. A for access, and the final D for decolonization. So no institution I know of uses all of these 6 letters together, but they often use some combination of them to refer to this important focus on language rights, decolonization, and also language revitalization. So over the last few years too, globally, we have seen improved technological tools, including mobile devices that do so much for us now for communication. We have augmented reality and virtual reality, which provides immersive experiences in particular contexts, including cross-cultural ones and cross-linguistic ones, and others in medical fields and in other fields. And these are used in teaching and learning and research. And Agnes mentioned that I have been involved in the American Association for Applied Linguistics, and I had the distinct misfortune of having to run their first virtual conference when the pandemic hit, and trying to figure out how do you bring 2,000 people from 90 countries together in different time zones with 1,100 presentations and many different formats, and with a platform which is still being developed because everything had to move so quickly. So just seeing the tools and how they could be leveraged, mobilized, transformed for our purposes and subsequently. And that's what we've been doing for the last few years, innovating and finding new ways of doing what we have done differently for many, many years. One of the key points in MIC is this notion of semiotic repertoires, understanding the languages people bring, but also the other ways of making meaning using the body, using symbol systems, as I mentioned earlier, and seeing and talking to students and others in the community about what it is they know, what can they do, what in their everyday lives, what resources do they use to make meaning, convey meaning, express themselves. And this goes along too with trans perspectives. Trans, I have a little star there, so it's, so translation, we know that. But also translanguaging, moving across languages for particular purposes. Transsemiotizing, moving across semiotic repertoires. Transgender work. You had a speaker who talked about narratives of gender transition, but also the language transitions that go with changing voices, moving to a deeper voice or a higher voice, presenting differently, so the embodied form of gender and so on. So there's been a lot of work newly in these areas, which is quite fascinating, and understanding how all of this is performed in situ. These are not static identities, these are things that take place in situ with others. Okay. The next, on the advances theme, the next slide looks at some of the creativity, and we've just seen a prime example of it, but the ways in which multilingual individuals mobilize this creativity through autoethnographic stories, which include different languages. There's an important book forthcoming by Agnes that does this for Cambridge University Press. Is that public yet? I've been given an advanced copy, and look at people talking about their lives, or through documentaries, or through books, or through other kinds of media, expressing their identities. And there's a book by Carmen Lee She studied with David Barton in the UK. She's now in Hong Kong. Multilingualism online. So if I asked some of the younger people, probably the older people too, but in Facebook or Instagram or WeChat or whatever of these, how do you use languages? Which languages and with whom? And is it all in one or is it a mixture? This is the kind of thing that Carmen Lee has researched with in real life. How do people use their languages and other symbol systems? And this is a prime area to research because it's ubiquitous, especially among younger people. Not only among younger people, though. Then on the top right, the image is a supermarket. This work is connected to linguistic landscapes, where they look at signage and other forms in which languages are used. And for what purposes and why those languages, in what order, what size, what kind of presentation, and what is the impact on viewers of those signs? How do they perceive them? Alana Shohami was one of your speakers, and this area is very fertile, and looking at these multilingual landscapes, in particular, diverse communities. I'll say a bit more about Quebec in a minute because it's connected to signage, but I'll pause that one for now. And then we see in media like Netflix or the news a greater inclusion of other languages, normalizing multilingualism. For instance, Jane the Virgin, that series. Suddenly you could hear in a popular Netflix series, you could hear Jane talking to her grandmother in Spanish and talking to other people in English and sort of representing the lives of contemporary Latinx youth and young adults in the States, or unorthodox with Yiddish and Hebrew and English and many other award-winning movies, Past Lives with Korean and English, and Anatomy of a Fall with German and French and English. And these are no longer in the foreign film section. These are quite mainstream, so we can see how languages are used, and I think that's very important in alerting the public to this as a reality for many people. In advertising too, of course, advertisers want new markets for their products, and they also want to be creative and win awards. So this Mueve tu Water on the bottom right of the slide was a Coca-Cola campaign, started in Argentina, but it was for American Spanish speakers. Mueve tu Water, move your water. So it was combining Spanish and English, and then it got a lot of press coverage because it was quite creative. And many people were saying, what does it actually mean? So the creativity and provoking people and saying, what is this all about? But advertising has tapped into some of this zeitgeist too. Agnes mentioned the American Association for Applied Linguistics, and this year, for the first time, for this conference just last month, and the submissions were sent in last summer. For the first time, people could submit multilingually. It's an American association. English is the language of the association. People talk about all kinds of languages in their presentations, but everything had to be in English before. But the policy changed that people could submit in English and another language and present in whatever language they wanted, although it had to be noted so people would, going to the presentation, could anticipate which language. So that was a new policy reflecting this view that, well, if this is what we're studying, we're researching, we're talking about, let's include it in the presentations themselves. And then we had some new strands, which are like interest groups. I had to write down one acronym on this piece of paper. One of the newest strands was ADIST, Anti-Racism, Decolonization, and Intersectionality for Systemic Transformation. It was started ADIST, that's why I had to write it down. So it got a lot of submissions because people are really interested in these issues around race, decolonization, and some of the other things I mentioned. The pandemic, you can't talk about advances without really thinking about what we have all learned as a species during the pandemic. Sign languages became more prominent in public health daily briefings than ever before, and the deaf community felt they reported feeling seen for the first time or feeling included and attended to, especially given the stakes attached to, the pandemic news. And in the middle of the bottom image, there's a guy on the right. On the left is our public health officer for British Columbia. And the person on the right, his name is Nigel Howard. He became a kind of rock star. He was the interpreter. And people said, oh, he's so expressive. He's just so animated. And people were talking about not just the deaf people, it's mostly the non-deaf people who were noticing he was so cool. American Sign Language enrollments went up and all the rest. And then people said, but that's how us American Sign Language works. You use the face in different ways. You use hand signs, but you also use the body. That's the nature of communication through ASL. So many people learned from that about sign language, how it works. And also the signers during the pandemic, not only in North America, but in other contexts, they had to adapt very quickly and innovate. For instance, when they heard the news of the day, they were hearing the interpreters are hearing people, but so when they heard about social distancing, they're trying to figure out how do we represent social distancing when that's not part of our normal lexicon, or other things. Coronavirus, there was a whole story of how they took something from Japan, a term they had used there, and New Zealand Sign Language was also discussed quite a bit in this regard. So I just wanted to say that for the pandemic, of course, we learned how to do things via Zoom, including conferences, but we also saw other ways of communication made very visible, which caught the attention of the public. And then we also learned the constraints on communication when people had masks on, right? And for deaf people, it was particularly troubling, perplexing, impossible. But for all of us, trying to understand what people were saying without the usual visual information coming and also the buffer. So a lot of research has been done on all these over the last few years because of this emergency remote shift to mediated communication, whether doctors' visits or legal cases in courts, and just fantastic for researchers interested in multilingualism and intercultural communication. So issues, I think those were the advances. Issues. We face many issues in the world, including nationalism, xenophobia, protectionism, the power of English as a global and hegemonic language, authoritarianism, and so on. This is not just in North America. This is in many different countries, and with Brexit in the UK, in Quebec. I just came through Montreal on Tuesday, and it's not Starbucks, it's Café Starbucks. They have such strict signage rules about French, and in fact, recently McGill University, one of the best universities in Canada, located in Montreal, it's an English language medium university. The Quebec government said that anyone coming from other provinces, English speakers, would have to pay double tuition or more because they didn't want so many English speakers coming to Quebec. And which, for an English medium university like McGill, one of our top ones, you could imagine the concern, and it attracts many international students as well. So this kind of isolationism is not just a Brexit thing, it's found in many other places, including in my country. And then, of course, there are the evils of genocide and trauma in many parts of the world, which affect languages, cultures, knowledge systems, and the people involved as they move. And thinking about as they move, the languages they might have spoken before are maybe no longer accommodated to in the new settings, and often there's serial migration after that, so people are in different refugee settings as they move to find a more permanent home. So these are all areas of important work, especially with refugees, and my colleagues at UBC do a lot in migration studies and refugee settlement and that sort of thing, including languages, cultures, and other aspects of the process. Now, we also know that not all multilingualisms, plural, or languages are equal. If you're an English speaker and you learn French, people say, wow, you know French. But if you're a speaker of, Uyghur in China, speaking Uyghur, you're persecuted, possibly. So we know that the hierarchies of language and the context in which they are promoted, valued, honored, are very different, and we have to recognize that. Of course, as an immigrant receiving country here in the US and Canada too, we know there are these big languages people bring and also smaller languages they come from, and then it becomes also difficult to maintain those ones that have fewer resources attached to them. It's just really hard. They have to create all the resources themselves if they don't already exist. In comparison with global world languages such as English or Mandarin or Hindi. The State Seals of Biliteracy is a program where people can get credit for the languages they know, but Kendall King at the recent AAAL conference mentioned that is not always possible for people who speak languages that in rural areas where they don't have ways of assessing them. So some people get the bilingual seal and others don't because of their location and the languages if they can't find people to accommodate them. Universities are very interesting places where language ideologies are also constructed and produced and reproduced. For instance, at UBC, we have Persian taught in Asian studies, and we have, of course, Hindi and Punjabi and Arabic and some other languages. It's interesting, they're all in Asian studies, but Silk Road kind of idea, but not Tagalog, not Vietnamese. We have a huge Filipino population in British Columbia and the rest of Canada. You do in the States too. Where is Tagalog taught? Where is it taught? I don't know. And I asked the head of Asian Studies, and I said, how come Persian, before they also taught Indonesian, it's no longer taught. And I said, why not Tagalog? Why not Vietnamese? And he said, no donors from the community have given us money to have an endowed position for those languages. So this is then connecting the university with the community and philanthropy and so on, which to some extent also determines which languages are offered or not. In short, the final bullet point there are some people who are encouraged to learn and maintain and use additional languages or their own home languages, and then there are others who are not. It's political, it's economic, it's often very discriminatory, and on this point, research in the UK and Canada has shown that some kinds of students are encouraged to learn other languages when it's not a requirement, and others aren't. For instance, Ursula Lanvers in the UK found that working class parents and the counselors for kids at their schools didn't encourage the kids to learn European languages, mostly in the UK context, but any languages. They said, just go and learn a trade, whereas the parents who were from middle class, upper middle class backgrounds who had traveled to Europe, who knew the value of broader, wide worldviews, etc., they were encouraging their kids to learn languages. And the same with respect to French in Canada, boys from working class backgrounds were not encouraged to learn French, which you may or may not know is one of our 2 official languages in Canada. And why? Because they said it's not cool, it's not masculine, it's not useful, all of these things, ideologies around this language relative to English. On the bottom right, there's an image. It says the intrusion of white families into bilingual schools. This is from the Atlantic. And they created, the US you've done a wonderful job in creating many kinds of dual language schools, which for various languages, which bring together English-speaking majority kids with people from minority backgrounds, say Spanish, and sort of in a 50-50 relationship where they learn each other's languages together and they learn content through those languages. It has been a very successful model, except, as you see from this title, the intrusion of white families into bilingual schools. There are too many from the majority group, and they're squeezing out the people who were meant to be the recipients, the beneficiaries of this model from the other half, and displacing them. And so these are issues that we have to grapple with. Another issue is neoliberal careerist views in higher education, favoring, say, STEM or business, English as a global language. You might have heard that West Virginia University recently closed its language programs. The president or VP said, well, people can, if they want to learn, they can just use apps. So there's apps, there's Rosetta Stone, there's Duolingo, and then of course there's Berlitz. And they said that's not what our 21st century young people need, is languages, which it seems, for those of us who are very sympathetic to multilingualism and intercultural communication, very hard to reconcile, but he said it's just not, expedient, and that's not what people need. And we know that apps can and cannot do some things very well. Some of you may be Duolingo users, many people are, but they're not very good at teaching culture or sociolinguistics or politeness or honorifics or fluency. There are many things that they don't help you do. They're pretty good with vocabulary and grammar structures. And then another factor that's an issue is that generative AI and its many affordances, such as translation, have altered public perceptions of the utility or benefits of L2 learning, second language learning. So they say, why do we need to? We can just push a button and it will do translation, right? And then there's I'll show you some headlines on the next page related to this kind of thing as well. And then there are misconceptions and suspicions about multilingualism. For instance, that if you learn other languages, you're not going to be good in the dominant language of the community, let's say English. So if you're learning and maintaining these other languages, it will be detrimental to your integration and your success. There's decades of research that dispels that notion, but it's still heard. Or that you won't be a loyal citizen if you speak other languages or maintain ties to other places. All of this, there's so much research, but we need to get the word out constantly to the public about that. So all of these factors and others have resulted in a sharp reduction in world language education in the Anglosphere, US, UK, Canada, and so on. In the latest statistics from the Modern Language Association, which came out recently from their 2021 survey, despite the geopolitical chaos out there related to Russian, Arabic, Chinese trade wars, etc., those languages have seen a sharp decline in numbers of students, just when we need people to know the languages and have intercultural sensitivity to those. And so the Inside Higher Ed headline was, foreign language enrollment sees steepest decline on record. What language went up? Korean, because of K-pop. People want to learn those, the singers and BTS and the serial dramas and all of that. Korean went up, I think, at least 25% in enrollments, even while Chinese was going down. So it's very interesting, and they aren't just Korean heritage kids taking it. They're, all kinds of backgrounds. Here's from the conversation on the right. It's lost in translation: the geopolitical risks of declining foreign language learning in Australia and New Zealand. The same could be said for the UK. Okay, the last frame is future directions, last theme. If I should get a 3-credit course for all the 37 previous speakers, I think 6 credits should go to the crystal ball. What's going to happen in the next 10 years? Look what happened from 2019 with COVID, pandemic, and then with ChatGPT coming on the scene, and everyone in every sector, in medicine, in law, and education certainly was thinking, now what do we do? How do we assess students? How do we assess their writing? How do we assess the legal cases where they plagiarized? And so this is a huge area for all of us to think about, not just how these things are being transformed, whether it's translation, documenting in endangered languages, transcription, things that those AI tools do very well, but we need to understand better how they're used in real interactions. Oops, that's okay. How they're implemented, how effective is human-human communication using these, how effective is machine or robot-human communication using this, how good are our existing or new tools at detecting fake, inauthentic, biased content, because we know AI is not neutral. The data they have is from a time, it's from particular kinds of programmers, white males, et cetera, and so it's very biased in representation of topics. How do we teach people, how do we do research on ways in which people interpret data they get from, or texts they get from AI for their veracity and inclusiveness of perspectives? I'm going to skip the Duff community one. The wearable communication and translation technologies is another big one. We have, if you have a smartphone like I do, it does different things haptically and other things to remind you, to be calm or whatever. But there are new earbuds and things that can do translation in real time. So that's going to be a way of the future with wearables of whatever form, body and so on, that can give you information in real time or translate for you. How are these used? Do they work well? What works well? What doesn't work well? And how and why? So all of these are things we need to consider as we also think about the ACTFL, American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, World Readiness Standards. How ready are we? How ready are we to embrace these technologies, critique them, and find ways of leveraging them that work, and also give us good results? This is the final slide on future directions. We need to continue to be advocates for heritage and indigenous languages and their well-being, and UNDRIP is the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and it's in Canada anyway, it's a high priority to revitalize indigenous languages and cultures and help give people the tools to document and teach and enjoy the languages that over a couple generations of traumatic policies that were in place were taken away from them, and so on. A lot of this involves very huge resources of emotional labor for the communities involved. We need to continue to champion human rights, language rights, ratio-linguistics. I was very interested to hear that our honorable guest from New York has been doing a lot of work with access, language access rights within the New York area, what languages are required as for people who need services and so on, and moving in that direction. We have a colleague, Aneta Pavlenko, who I think has been one of your speakers, doing a lot with Miranda rights and the language in which they're delivered and so on. In my university, there's a great deal of synergistic work related to climate, environmental justice, and languages, thinking about as these people are displaced due to rising waters and wildfires and all kinds of other environmental issues, what happens to their languages. In fact, there's a conference at Columbia University very soon, in the next few weeks, on climate and language, very humanities oriented. So this is an interesting area. Arts-based education and research, we've seen an excellent example, celebrating creativity and different ways of representing experience, whether it's hip hop or the documentaries, and this will continue to be very important to create some empathy among viewers of what is involved in this very complicated process of multilingualism and intercultural communication, migration, and so on. And we need some good media influencers who will make people feel like this is cool, this is interesting, wow, what's that all about? As hip hop has done for the ways in which language is used in many forms of hip hop. And so we need to normalize multilingualism. We need effective, adaptive, empathetic intercultural communication across the board. My final slide is it's not a tapestry, it's an acrylic painting by someone named Denise Tomassos. It was at an exhibition at the Vancouver Art Gallery a couple of weeks ago. She's a Trinidadian Canadian, and she did this painting when she lived in Philadelphia in the 80s. The 80s were a kind of dark and troubled time in Philadelphia with drugs and gang war and so on. But she saw the hope in the colorful houses in the community amidst some of the burned out structures and so on. And the title of this piece is Rally. And if you Google Rally, one definition is to come together to renew effort. And I think MIC at 10 is precisely about doing that. To come together. There are very difficult situations out there in the world and even on our campuses with their bright spots, they're seeing ways forward, but we need to come together to renew effort and to take action. So with that, I will say congratulations, MIC at 10. Can't wait to find out what goes on between now and MIC at 15 and 20, if I'm still around. May you continue to flourish, and thank you again for inviting me. I really enjoyed being here.
Thank you, Dr. Duff, for your inspirational speech. We have made the video recording of this speech. I'm sure we'll be releasing this speech for years to come. As the program draws to a close, I encourage you all to continue enjoying the company of your peers and colleagues, and while we wrap up the event. If you haven't already, be sure to grab some food and drinks, and thank you once again for joining us in celebrating this momentous occasion. Our celebration events will extend through the fall semester, and we will keep you informed of future events. Here's to many more years of promoting multilingualism and fostering the intercultural understanding. Thank you.